this will promise to be a powerful and inspiring evening of ideas and discussions. Just before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping notes. If the fire alarm sounds, it's not supposed to go off, so please just follow the people in the blue badges, and we will all have to evacuate downstairs. And I think the meeting place is outside the aquatic centre, but hopefully that won't happen. Toilets are located on this floor, just through the double doors by the stairs, if you haven't been told that already. If anybody needs assistance, please just let me know. Please do put your phones to silent, and to our online guests, I think your mics are all muted and cameras are off. And you can turn on the accessibility captions on Teams if you would like them. This is being recorded, this session. If anybody has any issues with this, please let me know as soon as possible. We will be wrapping up the presentations and the speeches by 8 o'clock, but we just have to be out of here by 8:30. Please don't forget to drop your visitors' badges to reception, otherwise you will be contacted and asked where it is. So please don't forget to do that on your way out. So before we begin, I just wanted to say a couple of words about the Transport Planning Society. TPS is the UK's leading professional body for transport planners, offering individual memberships for professionals and student members, as well as partnership opportunities for organisations. There are a couple of leaflets out by the biscuits over there if you want to pick up any reading material. We also have representatives here from CILT, Paul Lulham, who is our South East Regional Chair, and of course we have CIHT here as well. And Netta, yeah, welcome, thank you for coming. I'm excited to introduce TfL's Equity in Motion, which is a bold roadmap to make our transport network more inclusive, accessible and fair. Here at TfL, we're shifting from equality to treating everyone the same to equity, giving people what they need to travel safely and confidently. So that means prioritising disabled Londoners, older adults, ethnic minorities, women and low-income groups. So here's what we're trying to change. Step-free access at 50% of tube stations by 2030. Inclusive technology, virtual station tours, ramps and better signage. Multilingual updates on the TfL Go app, including British Sign Language. And looking ahead, we are passionate about embedding inclusive design in all of our future projects. This isn't just about infrastructure, it's about building a London where no one is left behind. So now I'm thrilled to announce and welcome our speakers. We have Fern Lulham, who is a passionate disability awareness advocate with a powerful story and a voice for inclusion. And joining Fern for our panel discussion, we have Antonetta Horbury from CIHT, Michael Barrett MBE from TfL, Clive Wood from Guide Dogs UK, and Dr. Kush Kanodia, who is a member of TfL's Independent Disability Advisory Group and is an accessibility advocate. So tonight, together, we will all explore how equity can be embedded across transport systems and decision making. But that's enough from me. So let's get the evening started. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Sorry,
you. That's all right. That's my
cue. Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't want to tread on any toes. Yeah. So I've made it to the podium, which was my first challenge. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. And I want to start with a question. Because in our noisy, busy world where we feel like we're more connected than ever and we're closer to each other than we've ever been, I sometimes still feel lonely. And I wonder if you do too. Loneliness can present itself in many different forms. It can be lonely to be the head of a household with a million things on your to-do list and no help. It can be lonely to be a leader where you feel like you have to keep it all together even when everything's falling apart. It can be lonely to be in a partnership when you feel like you don't have a teammate. For me, loneliness, I have found, can also be found in the gaps between who we thought we could be and who we actually are. In my life, that looks like the version of me who can see, the version of myself that I often long for and wonder about. Who would she be? How would her life pan out? What are the things that she could do that I can't do? And so I want to ask all of you, who paved the path to your personality? Who got you to where you are today? Who fueled your beliefs? And who gave you 1,000,000 marked tickets to your memories? Who labelled the map to your future? And how has your journey here been? All of the adults, the older people in our lives, when we were little, taught us things about ourselves. They taught us who we could be, what we were capable of, what we might be able to achieve. But what I want to put to you tonight is that as transport planners, as anyone who works in transport, you actually have an impact on that too. Let me take you somewhere for a moment. I want you to imagine a journey that you take often. It might be your commute to work that you do every day. It might be visiting a loved one. It might be going out for drinks with friends. Now I want you to imagine that journey with your eyes closed. Not as a stunt, but as your everyday experience. Suddenly, the platform disappears from under your feet. You go to get on the train, but there's no way of knowing where the door is. You wait at the bus stop, but you can't tell if it's the one for you. And before you have a chance to ask anyone, it's gone, and you're left stranded. All of these things teach us about how capable we are, what potential we have, and how much or how little we might be able to succeed in life. As a blind person, I often move through transport systems and spaces that weren't built with me in mind. Not intentionally, not with hostility, but with a kind of oversight that becomes its own message. You weren't considered. You weren't expected here. You don't belong. And that's a lonely place to be too. What I want to say to you is that those messages aren't put across by people, but they are put across by design. As a speaker, I am often told that I am so confident. How can you get up there and do something that for many people is their worst fear, or at least way out of their comfort zone? For me, stepping out of my comfort zone is often just trying to find the slot in an underground ticket machine without looking absolutely crazy. Trying to find a seat on the bus without sitting down on somebody who's already taken that seat. And don't even get me started on public toilets. The one place where you least want to use your hands as your eyes, all of a sudden presents 1,000,000 different things that you need to find. The toilet roll, the soap, the way to dry your hands. All of these things are inconsistent. There are so many different options, and I am left floundering. These are the things that send me messages. Because the truth is, the truth that I have to accept every day, I can't see. But a badly laid out space compounds that. Just as your critical parent or punitive teacher might make you feel so much worse about your best attempts. It's something we don't forget in a hurry. The truth is, design communicates. And that design, that public transport, it says something to everyone who moves on it and through it. And what it says can either empower and enable, or it can restrict and oppress. Bruising egos, slashing opportunities, killing self-esteem. As a blind passenger, I often have to have a lot of trust, not just trust in myself when I travel, but trust that people are going to show up for me. Many times I have gone onto a train or gone onto a bus and I've booked assistance for the other side. And sometimes that assistance doesn't show up. I will never forget when I went to a job interview and was left in that situation. I missed that job interview. Our jobs are important to us. They are so much a part of our identity. Perhaps tonight, when you've been networking already, people have come up to you and they say, "Hi, what do you do?" Our jobs matter. That job I never heard back from. I will never know if I would have got it if I could have actually reached the interview. And I will always wonder. There was another occasion when I was left wanting to cry on public transport, this time for a very different reason. I was on my way back from the hospital. I had just been told that my latest grueling eye surgery had failed. It had left me looking like a pirate for weeks. It had been emotionally damaging, and it had left me without very much sight at all. And on that bus ride, I heard an audio announcement telling me what the stops were that were coming up, what the next one was. But the thing that broke me, that brought me to tears, was that I didn't just hear a street name or a helpful reminder to take all of my belongings with me. What I heard was, even if you lose all of your sight, you can still be part of the world. There will always be a seat saved for you here. So what do we need to get more of that? More of those amazing moments that make us feel like, I belong here. I'm invited here on this journey too. I believe it comes down to creativity. And for me, there are 3 C's in creativity. I mean, not in the word creativity. And it might be ironic to you that C is the word that I'm going for as a blind woman, but I'm going to do it anyway. My 3 C's are these. Curiosity. We need to ask ourselves, how can this be different? Is there another way? Is there a way that wayfinding can be easier by using textures that guide me around so I know where I am? Is there a way that technology can be used so I can feel independent? I don't have to rely on asking somebody for help. What is the other way of doing this? I think we also need to be curious about ourselves and our values. Why do we do the work we do? What made us come here? And what made us want to engage in this? Think about what's important to you. Be curious and ask questions. My second C is about courage. It takes courage to listen when what you hear is really uncomfortable to process. And what we often want to do is to fix. And sometimes in fixing, we dismiss. We try to sweep it under the rug. We try to make it better without actually stopping and going, this is hard for you. I see the difficulty that you're facing here, and let's see what we can do about that. Courage is companies that say, you know what, we've never done it that way before, but maybe we can give it a go. My final C is about connection. Very often, when it comes to disability, we try to do for instead of doing with. And any of you who are parents will know that when you try to do for instead of doing with, it means that your life ends and your children's life never really begins. It is the same with disability. We need to work together, not to just ensure that platforms are accessible or the end product is inclusive, but that the process is inclusive too. We need to get people who have disabilities to have their say, to employ them as part of our teams so that we know them. They're just part of our lives. Because this is important for everyone, not just disabled people. I talk about curiosity, and maybe we need to be curious about what's in it for me. What's in it, I think, for all of us is that when people can access the world, we can have greater connection. We can have more financial opportunities where people can do more jobs. We can have more inclusion and belonging as a society. And we get to meet people and experience talent and skills that we would never get to experience otherwise. This stuff is so important and it's so human. So connect to what got you into this industry in the first place. My values are curiosity, courage, and connection. What are yours? We need to really recognize that at our core, at our emotional experiences, we have so much in common. We're not that different. And we need together to build transport systems and spaces that help all of us go out and come home to one another. You, as people who work in the transport industry, whether you be a planner, whether you be a builder, a decider, or a designer, you have the power to create spaces that don't just connect places, but connect people. Belonging is somebody being able to find their way around a space, navigate wherever they need to get to without fear, anxiety, shame, or restriction. The fact that they can turn up not just as a passenger, but as a full person. Because what I've learned about the version of myself who can see is that actually the things that I wish aren't the things that are important. Yes, I wish I could drive. Yes, I wish I could more easily get around without worrying so much. Yes, I wish I could make eye contact. Yes, I wish I could find my keys without so much stress in the morning. Maybe I'm not alone in that, even if you can't see. There are certain things that practically will always be harder for me. But what is it that I love about the version of myself who can see? She's confident. She has freedom, she's fun, she's independent. And actually, you know what? Those are all things that I could have as a blind woman, given the right conditions. So if there's one thing that you remember from what I've said tonight, let it be this. When you design, you don't just shape spaces, you shape experiences. You teach people how to feel about themselves and the world. And every decision, every door placement, every texture, every line of contrast can be a way of making us all feel more confident, more empowered, and more celebrated to be who we always were, who we are today, and everything that we can be in the future. Because when we together come at planning from a place of inclusion and collaboration, we open up a million new possibilities. We create a world where distance isn't so much of a barrier anymore. And most importantly, we create a space where none of us have to feel so alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Fern. Thank you so much. Michael Ryder. Thank you so much, Fern, for such powerful words. You've really painted us a whole journey and have enabled us to see a lot of the challenges that maybe we don't see that easily coming from a different perspective. I want to thank you all for coming here again. And for those who don't know me, my name is Liani Baglietto. I'm a board member of the Transport Planning Society. But most importantly, I am a passionate advocate about accessibility and inclusivity. Hence why, with the support of so many here, we have this event. Thank you so much for our collaborators in all these different institutions. But I imagine that many of you as well share this passion, or at least this strong interest in the topic. And this is a very critical asset that we have in our profession. Because as Fern was saying, we know that transport systems can really exacerbate some inequalities that are existing in our society, but they can also help redress those. But achieving the latter requires us to critically assess equity and fairness at every stage of the way, not just when you're on the tube, but how you get to the tube or how you actually get to the place. How did you all got here? I personally got a bit lost on Stratford Station, but was lucky to find a way with some support eventually. But this is about recognition, acknowledging the barriers that many people still face and hearing from those voices which have maybe not been recorded in the past, or that were recorded and were maybe got lost when we were aggregating data. But it's also about redress and addressing the historical and systemic inequalities that have been embedded in our systems. And it's not about asking, how do we actually do that? And a lot of you here in the room are transport planners. So you all have a role in answering this question. And I would like to ask you, in your mind, to start thinking, what are the one or two most urgent things or actions that we should take to improve access for all? And I would ask my panel of speakers here to also think on that question. And whilst you do that, and you can put them in the chat if you have access to the online presentations, and for those online, you can also add them and we'll try to collate them and put them in the summary of the event. And whilst you're doing that, I would like to also share some exciting work that is happening at TPS, our organization, this year. Our co-opted board member, Jim Murray, who's sitting right here, is a specialist in equality, diversity, and inclusion, and he's also an accredited auditor at the National Register of Access Consultants. And he's leading some important work doing an audit of our organization. This will really lay the foundations of how improve accessibility and inclusion across our processes and functions. And we are looking at shining this through our events, but also through the way that we respond to policy. So already, if you have any suggestions on that, please feel free to speak to me or to any other of our board members. Bruce is there at the back. Jolie is here at the front. We're a friendly bunch, so we would love to hear from you. Yeah, now this is enough for me. We have a really interesting panel here. They are all experts in their profession. You may recognize a few of them already, but I'll let them introduce themselves. And first, I would like to call Antonetta Corbury. She's the Director of Policy and Technical Affairs at the Charter Institution of Highways and Transportation, who will be sharing a bit about herself and the work that the CHT has been doing.
Shall I stay here?
Yeah, that's all right.
All right. Hi, everyone. So as Leonie's just said, my name's Antonetta Horbury. I'm the Director of Policy and Technical Affairs at CIHT. I'm really happy to be at this event, and thank you so much for Leonie and Jodie for organising. I think it's a really great event. So in terms of what CIHT is about, so we have 3 strategic aims, and one of our strategic aims is equality, diversity and inclusion, the other 2 being professionalism and climate change. But so equality, diversity and inclusion is really important to us as an institution, and as Leonie said, the only way we can kind of make a difference to society is by getting those who help build and change society to actually embed all of this in the way they work. We did a report last year called Creating a Public Realm for All. So that report was aimed at people who work in transport and highways, and it aimed just to highlight the barriers that some people face in using the public realm. So we were really lucky in that we had some really great input from a lot of people, and genuinely really happy with the input we got. It was also led by Professor Nick Tyler from UCL, who, if you don't know him, is a really inspirational person, and I would definitely recommend you look him up and look up what he's doing. That report didn't provide any answers to, it doesn't say this is how you do it, do A, B, and C, and you'll get a perfectly accessible public realm. But what it did do is it highlighted the kinds of issues different people face and the kinds of things that could help address those issues. And what it's aiming to do is to just raise awareness of the issues people have. And in terms of, Leonie's question, do I do my 2 things now or not? Or is this?
Yeah, you can.
Sorry, no, I was going to say, in terms of an answer to Leonie's earlier question on, what are the 2 things I think are the most important things that we should be doing? What that report said, and I think you're probably going to hear it from all of us, and you definitely heard it from Fern. So Fern started the thing. The 2 most important things, the first one is co-cultivation. So co-cultivation is an expression that was created by Nick Tyler. And when he first said it to me, I thought, well, what is co-cultivation? I've heard of co-design and I've heard of co-production. And he said, well, the thing is about co-design tends to be at the design stage, you get people involved, and then you say, well, thank you very much, and then you go off and design it. But what he said co-cultivation was, he said, is you're involving people right from the very start, right to the very end, after it's finished, and you just go round. It's like he describes it as sort of like putting a seed in the soil, watering it, having a plant grow, picking the fruit, and then beginning the cycle again. So it was what he said, which is really sort of struck home with me, was it's ensuring people are at the earliest stage of a conversation. So not when you're at the public consultation stage, when you've spent a shed load of money on a design that is going to be really hard to change. There's no point of asking people at that stage what it is that they want, because it's going to be very difficult to include them. It's to right at the start when you say, actually, we're thinking of improving our high street. At that stage, when you don't know how you want to improve your high street, you just know, you know, we want to make it easier for people to get to the shops. We want to, you know, reduce the amount of cars that are using the street. So when you're at the very, very early concept design stage, that's when you include people with lived experiences and you get their input into what they would like to see in the design and what would help them use that space more, and what are the barriers for them using that space now. And that's the other thing that the report sort of highlighted, is that often transport planners use existing data as a future model of what future data will be. But the point is, if you can't even access the area now, you're not going to be included in the existing data. So you need to, at the very earliest stage, say, you know, what does our data include, but also what does it not include? So, and then when you've got that, then you ensure that when you're designing, you're including people at every stage. And then when you get to the consultation, of course, you include them then. When you just got your final scheme, you also include them in things like, you know, picking materials. So it's not even just saying, well, we've got this final scheme, thank you very much, we're now just going to go and build it. You include people in the, does this material work for you? Is this going to work? In the traffic management, and I'm sure Michael will come to this, when you're actually building the scheme, it takes a long time for these schemes to build. You know, how are people going to navigate the area at that time? So that's a very long thing. Number one, sorry, I will not overstep my time, I'm sorry. Thing number two was to improve disability awareness training for people who are involved in making changes to the public realm. So it's, as well as having this report, this is great, but the point is, if nobody has to read it or nobody has to think about the things that it contains, then we're in exactly the same position as it is. So the other thing the report suggests is that, you know, people who are involved in changing the public realm should have to have mandatory disability awareness training, so that, as we said, people have a basic understanding of what's going on, because in a lot of places that is kind of lacking. You get training in lots of other things, but disability awareness training is sort of like a thing that you can or can't do, but you have to do your fire safety training, or you have to do your, you know, other training that you might have to do. And so that's it for me. Thank you.
Oh, that is perfect, and those are very relevant. I really like the cultivation aspect of it. It's a very interesting term, and it does shine a lot throughout the report. I'm going to now hand it to Clive to introduce yourself and to share your answer to that question. Right.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Clive Wood, and I'm the lead policy and campaigns manager at Guide Dogs. I think Guide Dogs is pretty well known for, guess what? Dogs. But we do a lot more than that. We are the biggest provider of support habilitation services for children and young people with sight loss in the UK. We also provide mobility training, so we call it rehab training, for people to learn how to get from A to B, to get around in their communities, from orientation using a cane. And of course, we do provide dogs through our guide dog service as well. One of the big pieces of work we've done recently, last year, we worked with, this is like a Nick Tyler appreciation society, because we did a big piece of work with University College London, Pearl, research called Designing for Inclusion, and Nick led on that, and we talked about cold cultivation, new word for me as well. It took me a few days to quickly say it as well. That's the hardest thing. Yes. And this piece of work that we did was around cycling infrastructure, 4 specific pieces of cycling infrastructure, which were bus stop borders, bus stop bypasses, floating island bus stops, continuous footways, and shared use pedestrian and cycle routes. And the reason that we wanted to do research around that and get some information and get UCL to do this work for us is over the last few years, where we've seen this type of infrastructure being introduced, we've heard from a lot of blind and partially sighted people that it is causing them difficulties in terms of getting around. It's been difficult to use that infrastructure where it's being used inappropriately or not being used in a way that's going to make it inclusive and accessible for all disabled people, but everybody else as well. And that was, I should say, that was part of the research. It wasn't just a piece of research looking on the impact on blind and partially sighted people, but it was looking at all impairment groups as well. And again, it wasn't about coming up with solutions. These highly paid architects and designers are in here today. I'm sure that's what you're going to come up with. But what the research was about is like saying, what are the issues and what needs to be addressed? And I would say that looking at the 4 floating island bus stops, we felt there are issues in terms of inconsistency and how they're introduced. And we feel that there needs to be more to be done around the research on how they can make them safer. Bus stop borders, absolutely not safe at all, shouldn't be used. And we're pleased that government are looking into that and asking local authorities to pause on that at the moment. And the same, we think, shared use cycle and pedestrian routes can be done in a safe way, but they need to be done in a consistently safe way that's going to not put a barrier up for certainly blind and partially sighted people, but other people as well. And the same with continuous footways. So that is the key area, piece of research we've been working on at the moment. We've been working with local authorities to try and see how they can make sort of enhancements and make these types of designs more inclusive. But actually, what we're wanting to see is government and Department for Transport and Active Travel England coming up with designs that are going to be inclusive and consistent so that they are accessible for everybody. And I'll only do one rather than 2 because I'm conscious of time. I would say absolutely, in the disability world, I'm of that age where I can still remember, I don't hear it as much now, which is quite disappointing, nothing about us without us. And that's so important. And we need, in terms of cultivation, and everybody's going to be saying this word now, aren't they? Because it is so important from the point of concept of a design. But even before that, when you're talking about a streetscape, coming up with designing a new high street, you know what really disappoints me now in terms of local authorities is we don't have access officers anymore. What happened to access officers? People in local authorities who had the skill, the knowledge to evaluate and review designs that were coming out from that local authority. Many of those people as well were disabled people, so they had lived experience. We don't see them anymore. Unfortunately, we do have in some areas, we have groups, access groups, but unfortunately, my view is that they are not as effective as they used to be. They're not listened to as they used to be in many circumstances. And I am worried that they are quite often a tick box exercise. So I think there needs to be more about investing in ensuring that local authorities have the best checking processes to make sure that inclusivity is at the heart of any design.
Those are really powerful words as well. It's not just about consultation at once, it's about cultivation, it's about systems of engagement throughout. And yeah, it's really exciting to see how some of the findings that you've been putting on your research have already made some influence in policy. The new bus bill had some interesting provisions on that. And yeah, because those ones were just very difficult, not only in terms of physical accessibility for those who cannot see, but also for people with different types of accessibility needs, for people with neurodivergency, and for children as well. Sometimes it's just thinking about a whole range of groups of protected characteristics at this point. Thank you so much. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Kush Kanaria, that is going to be introducing more of himself and his work.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm a disabled person. I've born and brought up in London and kind of experienced my disability affects all my joints. So I have mobility barriers. So I guess I'm probably well known for some of the campaigns that I've led on that have transformed systems within the UK. So one of them was transforming NHS England, abolishing all disabled car parking charges in all NHS hospitals in England. So that transformed 200 NHS hospitals, helping 3 million blue badge holders to access critical healthcare, getting the government to allocate an additional £1 billion into this policy change. And then most recently, the other campaign that I started and led on was reasonable adjustments to ULEZ. So we got DWP disability benefits exempt. That supports up to 315,000 disabled people in London, and extending grant payments from £2,000 to £5,000 to £10,000. I work with Transport for London on IDAG. So IDAG is the Independent Disability Advisory Group. So it's a perfect example of the disability mantra, nothing about us without us. We provide strategic and confidential advice to TfL. It's a group of 12, 13 disabled people who are experts in transport, disability and access. An internal resource essentially for TfL. We have projects coming up to us at different stages of their life cycle. So I totally agree. So going into my two key points, I think the first one is the change of philosophy, and the disability mantra, nothing about us without us, is to me, that is the essence. That is what needs to happen, not for disabled people, but with disabled people. The other key aspect to that I would combine with that is the social model of disability. So the medical model of disability states that what disables us is our impairment. We are the ones that need to be fixed, but the social model of disability flips the script and actually says what disables us is our society, barriers in society and negative attitudes. It's not disabled people who need to be fixed. It's the barriers in society that needs to be fixed. And if you look at all my campaigns, it's fixing society. The founding principle of the NHS is accessible for all, free at the point of delivery. How ironic we had a system where those most in need couldn't access free at the point of delivery. ULEZ was introduced in the middle of the pandemic. 6 out of 10 of all COVID-19 deaths are disabled people, even though disabled people amount to 17% of the population. And we were essentially adding a £12.50 tax for disabled people to access primary care, secondary care, social care, just adding a barrier unnecessarily. We gave exemptions to diesel black cabs, people with classic cars, for not adequate reasonable adjustments for disabled people. We didn't need to put in these barriers. So I think this is a really important aspect, is changing the philosophy. The other thing I would say is reframing the conversation. Accessibility is not just a cost. Until we actually start analyzing the socioeconomic benefit for accessibility, it's always going to be a skewed equation. That, like Motability did some really great research. I recommend you all look into it. It's called the Transport Accessibility Gap. This research found that disabled people take 38% fewer journeys, and the socioeconomic benefit of completely closing the transport accessibility gap in the UK is £72.4 billion. And I've tried to encourage the system to work out what is the socioeconomic benefit of completely closing the transport accessibility gap in London. I think when we're doing projects and we're not making them fully accessible and inclusive, there should be another figure that says, what's the cost to our system for not actually completely closing the transport accessibility gap? So that way, we're not just going to look at the cost of accessibility, we're going to look at the cost and the opportunity cost of not making it accessible. And I think to implement these two things, ask yourself two questions, like, are my actions helping to ensure a more accessible transport system or London? So TfL's people strategy, equality and diversity, focuses on a vision of creating a greener, fairer, more accessible London. But sometimes it feels as though we're taking one step forward and the system in some regards but taking 2 steps backwards in the system in other regards. And good examples for that is ULEZ, as I've kind of gone into, low traffic neighborhoods. How can you have hospitals within low traffic neighborhoods where, as a blue badge like holder or a person caring for somebody with a disability, we can't physically access the hospital? Like, it's crazy design. It has not been thought about in regards to shared spaces, floating bus stop or bus stop bypasses. How can we even allow things to be made that are not accessible and inclusive? And why should it take years of campaigning? ULEZ took 3 years, the NHS took 3 years. It should not take so long to actually make things accessible and inclusive. I guess the last thing I would say is ask yourself, what's your legacy? Accessible transport is a key enabler in our society, providing opportunities to education, employment, to be full and active participants in our society. But the truth is, we will all experience disability in some shape or form in the future, as 25% of disabled people have a disability. And as we get older, it's correlated with disability. When we get to the ages of 65, it's 50%, 85, it's 70%. So don't do this for me. Don't do it for disabled people. Do it for you. Do it for your friends. Do it for your family. Do it for your children. Because work out the probability we will all experience disability or some shape or form in the future. An accessible transport system is one of the greatest free insurance policies that we can give our friends and family and future generations. For when we design for disability, we're actually designing for us all. Thank you.
I almost feel like clapping. I want to feel like clapping for all of you. It's been great how you touched at the whole project life cycle stage, starting from the strategic case, and to what extent do we actually consider these sort of impacts in the economic case. We see it separately in the social impact assessment, in the quality impact assessment, in the social distributional analysis, but how much do we actually quantify of that? And then more towards the end of the project life cycle, once things have been delivered, what are the mechanisms that we have in place to ensure that we can provide feedback on schemes? So yeah, you've touched on so many different things. And now we're going to be hearing more from Michael Barrett from TfL, who comes also from a very different perspective to all of our speakers. I think we are quite lucky today. We have a very diverse set of backgrounds here. So, Michael.
Hi, everybody. So Michael Barrett, I'm the Construction Advisor and Innovations Manager at TfL. And I was just listening to everybody speaking. You know, you use that term expert. I think we should drop that. I've been in this business over 30 years in total in construction. I was a lorry driver. I've done planning. I've done traffic management, which is what I focus on now. And every week I'm learning something new. So if I was an expert, I should have known about that new stuff. And until we learn more, we start understanding the things we do. And part of my journey, because we talked about journey, which is really important, I'm deemed as having a learning disability. I've got behavioural challenges. My parents will tell you that, or shall I say my mum now. And probably a lot of people that work with me, you know, I don't shut up and I don't stop and I procrastinate, and you can probably guess where we're going on this. And what I found was I started setting up something called the Roadworks Patrol. So basically, I used to get a lot of people who cycled come to me moaning about how they weren't considered in traffic management. So we used to go for a bike ride, and I used to go with them. They were a bit shocked, thinking, "Oh, somebody from an office is coming out and riding with us." And I rode through this stuff, and I thought, "You're right, it's not very nice." So I questioned it. And you have all these books and stuff that says this is the way you do it, and this is what you don't do. So my question is, why don't we do that stuff? So I was getting certain answers, but then we started tweaking in, doing the stuff that wasn't deemed the doable stuff to make changes. And then I thought, well, I'm getting quite good at this. And then one of the cyclists that I was with, she had a mobility impairment. And impairment's not a great word neither. And she goes, "Michael, could you come and have a look outside my house?" Because sometimes she uses a wheelchair, sometimes she uses crutches. And I went and had a look and saw the challenges she had. So I thought, the Roadworks Patrol's got to change a little bit. We're not just going to cycle now, we're going to start walking it. And then I learned about wheeling. So as you see, my journey is continually learning from different perspectives and different people. And we're all different, albeit we like to put people into groups with how we do stuff. And looking at the temporary environment, it's not as attractive as architecture and planning. It's noisy, it's dusty, there's vibration, there's traffic cones that you don't want to take home. You don't want a traffic cone picture on your wall, but you'd like a building picture on your wall. And the cultures within that industry are, there's quite a lot of different terms, but I'll just say frustrating, how to get people to change the way they think. So number one, it's me considering them as individuals, that they haven't done the same stuff I've done or met the people that I've met to understand why you make change. And the best way is not for me to show a book for these people to say, this is how we educate you on this book. But this is Dave, this is Joanne, this is Sarah, this is Mohammed, this is Stephen. Watch how they negotiate life. And these are just a small portion of the community. So how can you decide for 4 people when you've got 23% of people deemed having a disability or a long-term illness in this country? So what we try and do is make effect through knocking on that door of actually look who you're impacting. This and what Kush has mentioned, talking about you, there is a likelihood that you will experience some form of disability as you get older, whether it's you experience sight loss or, so I've got severe arthritis in hips, toes and hands. I can't hold things so much anymore. But when I was 18, I was doing all sorts of stuff. So it's that learning curve that we experience. And you talk about these 2 actions. How long have I actually got? Because I've got to be careful. So you need to tell me, if I had a clock, I could link to it.
Now it is all very interesting.
Right, we talk about 2 actions. So number one, I think it's important we learn. We look at ourselves and say, we are not, I don't mean to disrespect anybody, we're not experts as we think we are, because we always need to learn. We also need to promote what we're learning and also our inefficiencies ourselves, and then also get some results from it. And I'll just give one story. Can I do that quickly? Yes. So I normally have loads of people that I meet. So I'm just going to talk about George. And George has, I have to say it properly, functional neurological disorder. Has anybody heard of that term? It's challenging. He explained to me when he wakes up in the morning, how he's different. Sometimes he might need to use a wheelchair. Sometimes he might not. He experiences sight loss. Sometimes he loses loss of his upper limbs. And I was thinking, I know a lot of people, when they wake up, this is what they know, what they've got to negotiate or how they have to negotiate stuff. It's different for him. And where he lived, so he's part of a disability group called REAL. It's not an acronym, it's REAL. He's part of that. So we're doing some work with REAL and Tower Hamlets. And he sat at this meeting and he told us his experience of how people are calling him a cheater. And he's been egged. And the construction site next to where he lives, they made him a little walkway so he gets the accessible parking, but people block it. His car gets egged, he gets egged, he's fed up. You can imagine that, how, because that's bullying. And that's direct bullying, what people are doing. So we went down, we assessed the site, black hoardings everywhere, red lights on the black hoardings, illuminating the walkway. So we advise on change the colour, put this in, protect this, do that. And Lovell is the developer. I'm going to tell you they are Lovell. They did all this stuff for George, and it's made such a difference in his life. And that's what you want. And I know he's one person. TfL promotes Every Journey Matters. But when George says to me he's happy, and I've heard his, without me swearing, his story, story, which is shocking. And you wouldn't want that to happen to you or anybody you know. We've made a change. And this is what my fellow panelists, they've used some big words, which I can't use because I struggle with them a little bit. But yeah, it's about, what's that first word?
Co-cultivation.
Saying
that
it all the
one.
time.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's about raising awareness, but do it in such a way that your audience might need you to shrink some of those words, might need to change the colour, the format, the writing, the approach. As you can see from this slide, is what we do at presentations. And one of my team, and this is what you mentioned about, has a guide dog. Name's Winnie. She works for TfL. My role is to go in the toilet to check if it's clean, and I have to clean it. Oh, sorry, I don't have to. I do clean it because I want to clean it for her to use and feel comfortable. How many people have to go into a toilet for their friends to go and clean it? And I don't walk around with cleaning kit. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
You. You know what? But yeah, no, that's all very important as well. It's bringing the focus back to people. It's with reconnecting again. Why do we go into transport planning if it's not for public service? And I'm going to now start with a few of the other questions that I have. So first, we're going to talk a bit about design, and we talked about how different people may be experiencing things. From transport planning, we sometimes may approach them from our own lived experiences. So that's already a bit of a barrier of understanding how different people may be experiencing our designs and policies. So how can we avoid a one-size-fits-all approach in our schemes, in our policies? And more related to that, how do we better identify needs and expectations? How do we engage with these people that may have diverse needs that we have not experienced before in the past ourselves? I'm going to start with Clive. Would you like to start, if that's all right?
I will try my best. Quite a question, really. We say one size fits all. It's not necessarily a bad term, you know, and I think you could, as I said earlier, it's about consistency in design, and that is so important for many people. But from my own lived experience of sight loss, having a consistent design, being confident that when I go out into the built environment, into street space, that, you know, there's going to be the right tactile in place, the right crossings in place, that there's going to be where I'm going to feel confident. I think is so important. The problem is at the moment there's no consistency, and that's where the whole system breaks down for lots of people in terms of getting from A to B, if you want to call it that. But importantly, it's about independence. Now, I'm going to mention it. I went to Walthamstow recently. Is anybody from Walthamstow? I don't want to upset anybody. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I went to Walthamstow a couple of times. I've been there a couple of times. And as I was saying earlier about the types of cycling infrastructure there, I've travelled all over the world quite independently to lots of places. I absolutely could not travel around Walthamstow independently because of the infrastructure that's been put in, the shared use cycling pedestrian routes, the bus stop borders, where I'm walking right onto a bike lane to get on and off a bus. I just felt I was so angry that I've been to a place that I had to grab hold of somebody's arm to get me from A to B. So I think it is about consistency. It's not about designs don't have to always be the same, but it's making sure that you have designs that are used in an appropriate way in an appropriate place. So it's coming up with those standards, using the right design in the right place. So one size fits all probably isn't a great thing, but it is about consistency and continuity.
That is very interesting what you're saying, because Walthamstow is normally seen as the gold star.
It's a nightmare.
Thank you. Yeah, no, but normally, in terms of active travel and public realm, people tend to say that Walthamstow is amazing. But it is true that how are we measuring that? And we may have very diverse opinions on that. But yeah, so I will now pass it to Michael. Would you like to continue?
Design. Whoa. I go all over the place with my job, not just London. So I've done some stuff with the Icelandic Coastal Administration, and it's a little bit different over there. It's quite cold most of the time, and it's talking about consistency. Across London, there's a lot of inconsistencies, and I think for us, it's as designers within authorities, is to come together as one to do that. And I think we're very separated. Is that thoughts on that? And if we can come together as one, and we should be able to deliver for one, but not for one, for everyone. I think that's a simple answer.
Yeah, no, that's That is that's great to hear, because on the role that you are in TfL, it is exactly that. It's about strategic integration between our boroughs and how we can achieve that consistency, but towards the better. Now we're going to go a bit more into the strategic, and I'm going to ask you, Antonietta, to maybe, hopefully, you can answer this.
Oh, same question. Okay,
Yes,
yeah,
same
okay,
question,
okay.
sorry.
So yeah, no, I completely agree with Clive in that we need consistency of design, but I would slightly disagree on the fact that the one size fits all, getting a perfect solution. Because I do think that every area is kind of unique to itself. And if you try and just say, well, you know, this is what, like a crossing or whatever it is, you might end up creating things that, what's the word? Inadvertently creating problems just because you've just gone, this is what the design book says, I'm just going to put this in because that's what that is, because there might not be enough space to do things properly. And what I would go back to co-cultivation, sorry, Michael, but I think it's always important that you consult local people, especially people with lived experiences, and actually explain to them and say, this is what I'm thinking of doing. This is where if I follow the design guidance, this is exactly what's going to be. Will that work for you? Is there anything else I could do that could help you in this particular area? Because different areas do have slightly different needs, and it might be that, for example, you know, local people say, well, we always walk on one side of the road. So if you're redesigning it, maybe make that pavement a bit wider than the other. All I'm saying is I think by talking to people at a local level, you will get the best result. And I think it does need to include, as we said before, people with lived experience. But you can start off with your consistent design as the starting point, trying not to make as many changes as possible, but you might better add to it. You might better say, you know, this is what the design is, but we could also add these other features which aren't in the standard design, which we could add because the environment allows for it. I don't know if you're going to disagree with that, Clive.
Slightly, but
Okay, go. Let's have a debate.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I think you've mentioned the physical infrastructure, but also the soft infrastructure and the systems of support that we should be putting in place once we put a scheme. It's not just delivering the concrete, it's also how are we going to communicate that to people? And going a bit even more further out into this, in the strategic and more towards policy, maybe Kush, would you like to say something about how we can make sure that we are delivering towards everyone?
Sure. So I honestly don't know in this day and age how we can still get approval to design something that's not accessible. Like there needs to be like a redesign of the process. And actually, if it's not accessible, it should just be rejected. And then we can start to implement universal design principles from the very onset. Like you're not going to get permission to design something that isn't safe. You know it's going to be rejected. If we have the same kind of standard in regards to accessibility, if it's not inclusive and accessible, it's going to be rejected. That should be the default position. And then maybe you need to go to the top person, you know, the commissioner or the minister in regards to get special approval as if there's a exceptional circumstances. I think until we completely change the process, we're going to keep getting things that are going to be designed that are not accessible, and it's going to be approved, and there's going to be campaigns for people saying, no, that's not acceptable, and it's going to be implemented, and then people are going to say, oh, it's been implemented now, we can't take it off because it's too costly. We need a complete redesign of the process. If it's not acceptable, it shouldn't be approved.
Yeah, completely agree. And well, we've now touched on very procedural things. And of course, we know that the quality impact assessments sometimes are seen as a tick box exercise once a decision has been made. So it's more about how can we make that a proactive tool, and how can we think of equalities from the outset rather than at the design or once we are just like fine tuning things towards the end. But I'm going to cut my questions a bit short just because I want to give some space for the public to answer some questions as well. And those online, if you have some questions, you can also post them on the chat and we'll get to them. So I'm going to talk about collaboration now. Collaboration for systemic change, which have an integrated national transport strategy coming up, quite soon, hopefully. But I want to ask you, what would that look in practice? Who needs to be consulted? Who needs to work together? How do we make better integration between modes? A journey is not just one form of travel. It involves many of. And I'm going to start. Actually, would you like to?
Sure.
I know I asked you to do that. And you were here for like the key speaker, but I think you would have some interesting.
Yeah. I think for me, in fact, one of the things that I was going to say about one of the key changes that I think need to be made is around enforcement, because we have laws that get put in place. You know, I think about the Equality Act, for example, and everyone always quotes that, well, we have the Equality Act, so people can't discriminate against disabled people. And yet discrimination and lack of inclusion is happening left, right, and centre. And I think that is because when it comes down to it, although laws are put in place, very often it is down to the individual then to be able to enforce those laws. So if I go in somewhere with a guide dog and I get refused access, nobody is fighting for me. I then have to go to court myself. I then have to try and afford a lawyer. I have to go through all this stress of you know, confronting this and a lot of time that maybe I don't have because I have better things to do with my life, perhaps, you never know. And that makes it really hard. You know, another law that I've heard about is the fact that by October this year, any buses that are under 11 years old are supposed to have audio announcements, like I was talking about earlier. I've seen no evidence of that where I live. I don't live in London, so, you know, I'm sure there's more here, but I live in Hastings and I've seen no evidence of that. And again, where's the enforcement? It's sort of like, yes, that law is out there, but again, if I get onto a bus in Hastings after October and there is no audio announcements, it is then on me to try and do something about that. And I feel like you talk about, you know, who do we need to work with? I think we need to work with government to say, how can we make this so that there are checks being done and there are consequences if these things aren't happening? Because it would be lovely to think that people were just doing it out of the kindness of their hearts, but the reality is that that is not what we're seeing. And again, I think as well as looking to the outside, who do we need to connect with? It's also about just bringing it into quite a personal level and saying, who is around me in my life that I can look at for direction on this? Who needs this support that actually I can learn from? And something that I like to say to people is, when you are in spaces, like let's say you go to the station or you're getting on a bus on your way home, you know, you get lots of opportunities to do this. Almost play this little game in your mind. Pick a disability, anyone you like, and just think, there's two questions. The first is, what would I need? What would I need if I was blind, if I was deaf, if I was in a wheelchair, if I was neurodivergent, whatever it might be, in this scenario to make this easier for me? And you never know, you might come up with, you know, the next thing that's going to be on Dragon's Den and you might make yourself a lot of money. The second question is, how would I feel? So a big part of the work that I do is not just around the practicalities of disability and inclusion, but it's how does it actually make me feel as a person, which is probably why I spent so much of my speech talking about that, because that's the real impact. It's how do I feel about this? Do I feel humiliated? Do I feel embarrassed? Do I feel ashamed of myself because I can't interact with the world like everyone else can? Am I internalizing that, like we were talking about with the social model earlier and the medical model? And so I think actually we can understand it on a very personal level because, as has been said, it affects all of us. Over 80% of people with disabilities were not born with those disabilities. They acquired them throughout their life. And so sometimes it's about looking outwards and saying, help us, people in power. And sometimes I think it's about looking inwards and saying, what can I learn just from asking those questions of myself and of the people who matter the most to me, who I love?
Absolutely. Those are very important questions that we should all be asking. You mentioned the public sector equality duty there, and we do have a duty to advance equality of opportunities between different groups. And you mentioned that it's about justice. It's about procedural justice, not in terms of suing people at the end, but actually how do we make the process just from the start? So yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm going to, before I open to the floor, would any of our panelists like to answer that question of the integrated national transport strategy and how do we actually do those partnerships for change?
I think that's a really hard question. The integrated national transport strategy in itself is a kind of a big ask because transport is not integrated in this country, and it's a big task to get there for I'm going to say standard transport in quotes, it's even harder when everything has to work to go from end to end. If you've got a disability, you've got to be able to go from your house to this room or whichever room you need to get to. Everything has to work along there and has to continually work. And given that, I know, I think Jodie, you said 50% of tube stations are being accessible in London by 2030. It's a really great aspiration, but that still leaves 50% that aren't. You think about outside London, the amount of inaccessible train stations, and as Fern said, even though we have legislation that says, you know, buses have to be accessible, you know, the audio equipment needs to work, the ramp needs to work. You know, I was talking to someone earlier, and they were saying that their friend couldn't get on the bus because the wheelchair space was always busy, and 3 buses go past. So even though you've got the wheelchair space, it is such a very big task. But I'm not saying that we shouldn't achieve that task, but I just don't think it's going to be done on the same time frame as integrated national transport strategy. But we need to make progress, and we need to have that as the goal, and we need to keep moving towards that goal, and we need to keep saying, you know, this is what needs to happen. We need to be able to have everyone be able to make A to B journeys constantly. I mean, okay, fair enough, there's disruption, but even if there's disruption, a person with disabilities should be at exactly the same disadvantage as a person who isn't disabled. Everyone has to have the same journey experience, but there is such a long way to go, such a long way to go. But I don't think that we should be depressed by that. I think we should be sort of invigorated to say there's a lot to do, and there's so much we can do and so much we can change.
Yes.
I find systems value academic experience and they value work experience. And the key missing component is lived experience. And it ends up being the most critical component. So actually, IDAG is a really good model. Like, you imagine if Keir Starmer and the Labour government had a similar IDAG model in government, maybe they wouldn't have been humiliated in, the House of Commons in regards to welfare reform, like they have recently. And the key recommendation from that was co-design with disabled people, not for disabled people, but with disabled people. I think one of the key things I find missing right now from our transport system is there's no feedback loop. So many disabled people come to me complaining about this, giving feedback about that. Microsoft has a disability answer desk. Why don't we have an accessibility answer desk that's accessible, that also has a phone line? If you amalgamate all the feedback in regards to accessibility that we have from the users, from disabled people, from older people, from parents pushing a child in a pram, from the people taking big trolleys to go to the airport, and you just literally fed that back into the system and actually resolve these issues, you would have that virtuous cycle within the system that would correct itself. You wouldn't need campaigners like me, spend years of their life fighting a system that's ableist. The situation is ridiculous. All we need is these feedback loops. And I think there's really worrying signs that I see right now in our system. And I'll just give you one example and just look at EV charging. Currently, 1/3 of councils don't offer accessible charging. We found out that only 2% of UK EV chargers are accessible, mandated with PAS 1899/2022. In 5 years' time, we're going to have a transition when we leave combustion and go to EV. In London, we've already implemented 1/3 of our EV infrastructure. If it's not mandated soon, we're going to have a system that's inaccessible. These are the changes I see, but I don't see any urgency in the system to actually mandate accessibility. If we don't do it now, imagine what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's not just about delivering to the higher aspirations that we've put in terms of, we're going to put one wheelchair or an accessible wheelchair space because one is not enough. It's not about audiovisual announcements because maybe the audio is a bit blurred. It's about EV chargers. It's not just delivering chargers, it's how accessible are they?
Mm.
And you've really called us all to action to really think in every project that we do, what are the feedback mechanisms, what's the monitoring and evaluation that is in place, and how accessible that is in the first place. So yeah, with those very strong, powerful words, I'm gonna open it up to the public in case anyone has any questions.
My name's Vincent Stops. I worked for 20 years for London Travel Watch, the organisation that represents passengers in London and the users of the 24 system. I have to say my question is about floating bus stops because I'm now a volunteer for the National Federation of Blind UK. In 2014 was the first time that TRL produced a report for TfL saying that blind people would be deterred from using their bus services. This is a question to Clive. So for 10 years, TfL have known about this, Clive. They've been looking at the design endlessly. Is it really just about consistency, or is it a bigger issue than consistency? Is it, as we believe, how people are using these bike lanes that travel through bus stops?
Thank you for the question. I think certainly from the research that was done by UCL, I think some of the key issues were what was being put in place in terms of how they floating bus stop islands were being introduced. I think that's really important to say, but I think it is evident that that disabled people weren't involved in those decisions, in those discussions. It's quite evident of that, and I would think it was intentional actually that they weren't involved, unfortunately. And we've just seen them being introduced in a way. What the report did say, UCL did say that they have been introduced in a way that is, they need to, the consistency in terms of design. And what I was trying to say earlier was that absolutely different environments are different. Different environments will need different types of design, but you need to come up with stock designs that can be used in different places. But the important thing is, and what the research showed was, that at the moment, as a blind person, if you're going to be in an environment, if you're going to get onto a bus or off a bus, you need to know which way to go to get to the crossing point, to cross over, to go to the pavement. You need to know where the tactile is that's going to show me how to do that. Now, what the research has said is more research needs to be done, and we understand that is the case now, that more research needs to be done to show. They need to show that they can be safe, they can be inclusive, and that they can be usable. And we're not saying that they can't be, we're not saying they should be, but what we're saying is more research needs to be done to show evidence that that is the case. And at the moment, what's being done at the moment by different local authorities is that these designs are being introduced in a way, quite often in cases that are not safe and are not being used and are a barrier for people, disabled people, including people with sight loss. So what we're saying is there needs to be more research to look to see if they can be made inclusive. And that needs to involve disabled people from the beginning, as we said before. Cultivation. I'm going to say it again, Mike.
Absolutely. Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the public?
Got a couple of questions and comments online, so
Perfect. Okay.
I don't think you can see it. I'm going to stay here, but I'm just going to say, we have had a comment from Mega Harati, who says the most important thing is staff training, thorough staff training involving disabled people with frequent refreshers and aimed at staff understanding and attitudes as well as practical actions. Build it in, don't bolt it on. So that's a comment that's come. I think everybody agree with. And Marilyn Crawshaw has made a comment that we also need to argue for human rights, not only equality. The chair of the Parliamentary Transport Committee report, Access Denied, in March, said that access is not a nice to have, but a human right, and we need to use human rights more. Then we do have a question from Dr. Paul Furman. What are the panel's thoughts on the recent phenomenon of e-bikes riding on pavements and speeding through pedestrian zones? Have we allowed or enabled too much accessibility for this mode of transport? I personally feel very unsafe as a pedestrian walking through city centres. I now feel partially excluded from such previously perceived safe urban spaces. Who wants to start?
Start that one.
I'm quite happy to start it if you want me to. I mean, obviously, we absolutely agree. We've seen since the pandemic, the last 5 years, we've seen a massive increase in the number of e-bikes and e-scooters. In London alone, we're seeing hundreds of thousands of privately owned e-scooters, all illegal, we must say, all illegal, should not be used anywhere other than private land where you have permission, but we're seeing them being used. We're also seeing endorsement from TfL and the boroughs around rental e-bikes being used and absolutely causing complete havoc, barriers to many people where they've been poorly parked. We do welcome now that in terms of around looking at the devolution bill and work being done around that we are going to see more powers being introduced. And we also know that TfL are working with the boroughs to introduce, well, it might be superseded now, but in terms of micromobility policy, to make sure that there's a consistent approach how the rental e-bikes are being used, so that we need parking on streets, parking bays on streets, not allowing, and they need to be mandatory. And we're seeing that in some of the boroughs or parts of the boroughs, and we need to see it being, sorry to say, consistent, so that everybody can walk along a pavement, not having to worry about coming across a certain bike, maybe a lime-coloured bike, that is blocking a pavement. It's not right. People should be able to leave their homes, go where they want to go without having to climb over a bike or get around a bike on a pavement. It was funny to say, but I would say that with e-scooters and e-bikes, they can be introduced, of course they can, but the government, we have now seen the government say with e-scooters, for example, that the trials have been going on for 5 years, and now they've said they're going to extend them for another 3 years. What else can they find out in 3 more years? 8 years of evaluating is absolutely ridiculous. And it's all this time we're seeing e-bikes and e-scooters which go at exceptionally high speeds. And we were walking with my colleague Kate today, we were walking through shopping centre here at Westfield, and there was guys on roller skates going at such speed, which is absolutely terrifying. I think I'm becoming an old phobia. I mean, we're in a situation now with e-bikes where many of them are illegal, and the police they're saying they haven't got the resource to do enforcement, but something needs to be done.
Yes, Jim?
Uh,
Thank you, Clay.
I'd just like to come in on this particular topic. Down in the Solent area, the different local authorities have put there are e-bike rental schemes, as well as various discrete rental e-scooter schemes run by local authorities in various cities. But they put together a micro-mobility qualities forum, and we meet every 2 to 3 months, and we've actually had some successes, at least with the rental micro-mobility. Unfortunately, not with the illegally souped up e-bikes or the private e-scooters, I'm afraid. But I've just, I've just wanted to give this as an example, as it not necessarily co-cultivation, but it is actually feedback, and it has been. It is quite well designed. So what's happening is we're starting to put more docking stations in the street, which in the carriageway, which actually discourages from taking your scooter and using it on the footway. It actually reinforces that thing that it's for use in the carriageway only, and also they ramp buoy
who are the operators have ramped up the enforcement of violations and penalties for the violations as well. So I'm just trying to say that working together, although this was purely a voluntary thing, I think it's something, it's as well managed as it can be, and it shows the value of that working together with disabled people with a range of different needs and access needs and concerns.
Thank you for sharing that, Jim. That's very powerful, and I quite like that it ends up on a bit of a positive note of how we can make use of technology, of innovation, creativity, and actually just the fact of us being here today, learning something new. Hopefully you have all learned something new. I certainly have. We will be sharing some notes from this. And I think this also counts as training if you're doing CPD. I'm not sure. If you're sorry.
CIHT.
Yeah.
No, CPD is basically, if you've learned anything today, it counts as training for CPD. So
Yeah.
do record it.
I think you just need to make some notes
Yeah.
on what you've actually learned and make sure that you keep those and you keep reminding yourself of these things so that it doesn't really end in a conversation, but that we can actually get to implement these things. So I'll ask you for one favor to please thank our panel. I'm not gonna say the name expert, but to thank our panel. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. As we mentioned, there's still some refreshments outside, yeah. And there are some leaflets of TPS. Do consider joining TPS if you are not already a member. We'll be trying to do more of these exciting events. And if you do have any suggestions, please let us know. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you.
Very good.
I'm sorry, we didn't.